Hey everyone, I'm here with Trent Loos, who's a sixth generation cattle farmer. Is that right, Trent? And Trent,
Livestock producer. We have
livestock
cattle,
producer.
we have pigs, and we have horses.
And many of you know that California is on the brink of banning the sale of fur across the entire state. And I saw on Facebook that Trent has come out very much against this, which was a little surprising to me, Trent. And I think maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was under the impression that based on the conversation we had last time, you might actually be at least sympathetic to the fur ban. We're going to explore the merits of the fur ban in California, what's actually going on, hear from these different perspectives. But as I did last time, I mean, first, I wanted to really emphasize there is some common ground here. And some of the things, some statements I'm going to make that I think you probably would agree with would start with one. We probably both agree that dogs and cats should not be killed and used for fur. Would you agree with that?
I'm not going to kill or use any dog or cat for fur.
Yeah. And
I'm not going to say that somebody else shouldn't. I
really,
don't think that we should have a ban on that. No.
even so, even if it's somebody's companion animal. So, for example, in China, where
Why
most of
why would we take a companion animal and eat it or use it for fur? By the way, you've yet to recognize my Russian sable hat keeping me warm on a cold winter day in Nebraska, Wayne.
we'll talk about the sable hat in a moment and talk about what
Okay.
happens to those sables and the mink in the fur industry. That I'm guessing some of the details from the fur industry, or even things that you can't stand behind, you'll be shocked by. But you asked the question, why would someone take someone's companion animal? Well, the reason, quite simply, is that in China, they actually have no regulations whatsoever. And China is now the
Mhm.
world's largest fur producer, and they do use dogs and cats. And there have been notorious instances, friends of mine know about these instances, where people grab dogs off the street. And a couple years ago, there's actually a blind man who had a seeing eye dog. He was grabbed by a bunch of folks who threw the dog in the back of a truck and sent the dog off to a slaughterhouse. And it was a huge scandal on social media because people around the world, including you, I mean, even you said
Mhm.
yourself, why would anyone do this? You're right. Why would anyone do this? That's
Right,
clearly
right,
wrong. So we would agree
right.
at least with that.
I also support harvesting horses and consuming them around the world,
Yeah.
but I don't think that we should tell everybody they need to sell their horses. They need to sell their dog, donate their dog, whatever the case, into the fur and trade market. Choice of the individual property owner, and in this case, it's the
Yeah.
animal owner.
Yeah. And I think that, my perspective is obviously the animal should have some say in this too. And if the animal doesn't want to be beaten to death, as dogs are beaten to death in China, does not want to be skinned and boiled, which in some cases animals
How do you
aren't.
know? How do you know
Well,
the dog doesn't want that?
well,
Does the
because
dog does the dog want to receive vaccinations to protect itself?
Well, and I think there are ways that animals can communicate. For example, when they scream out in agony when they're being beaten to death, and I've seen this in my own eyes in dog slaughterhouses in China. The way they kill them in China is they
Hmm.
they put them in these huge pens, and then one by one they drag them to the slaughter floor, and they take a metal club and just smash them in the head over and over again. And honestly, it's one of the darkest and most horrible moments of my life was shooting footage of this happening in China. And you may not know this, Trent, but dog fur is actually banned in the United States of America. But despite the fact that there was a law passed by the federal Congress, which you may or may not have supported, I don't know, in 2010, saying you're not allowed to use dogs and fur, and further that people who sell fur have an obligation to truthfully advertise where the fur comes from, the origin of the product. There was an investigation done in, I think it was 2012, showing a lot of the fur that was marketed as fox and mink and coyote was actually from a dog in China. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, actually, what China does, I have no control over.
For sure.
What I do have input and control over is what happens in my representative republic, which currently happens to be 50 states, called the United States of America.
Yeah.
So what they're doing, and what I'm saying is that that doesn't impact me at all.
Yeah. But it does because we do have control. I think you're not giving yourself enough credit, Trent, because we as the largest economic power in the world, and we as a people who can make decisions about what we want to import in from China and what we don't, we can make a decision and say, you know what, China and the Chinese government, you may allow people to steal dogs from blind folks, beat them to death with metal clubs. But in our country, we don't stand behind animal cruelty, and we're going to ban these products entirely.
So for as long as China was killing girl babies that were born,
Hmm. Including
what
my
did
great
we do?
grandmother.
Right.
My
What
great
did we do
grandmother.
about that? Because I know your family immigrated from China.
Yeah, you're right.
So I would be more moved to do something about that because of the atrocity of humanity,
Yeah, you're
killing
right.
babies.
Killing them
That's
and
not much
binding.
different than what we're talking about right here in the United States today. abortion and even after birth abortion and things like that. But I don't put that on the same plateau as taking the dog's life,
so
even though I don't support cruel and unusual punishment, even in death.
Yeah, and you're right that there have been a lot of horrible things done to violate human rights in China as well. And
correct.
I was saying about my great-grandmother.
And that would seem to be a better time spent than what we're trying to charge down right here.
Yeah, but what I like what you're saying is that you're comparing these human rights atrocities and atrocities against animals, that they're similar. Even if you're saying that...
No, that was nice, Wayne, but I did not compare them. I said that the human atrocities should receive more attention and support.
Well, here's the great thing, that there's no reason we have to fight battles between these two causes, because there's nothing about torturing animals that helps the humans, and there's nothing about torturing the humans that helps the animals. So these two things are in alignment. And I'll give you one example of that. In China, my great-grandmother... Actually, can you move your head a little bit? There we go. Perfect. Just I don't want people... I want people to see your wonderful face and to be able to...
Oh, you're worried about my Russian sable covering your face, aren't you?
Maybe so. But what I was going to say, Trent, was my great-grandmother actually had her feet bound. And for 1,000 years in China, that was the tradition. That was the practice they adopted. And 5% of the little girls would die. 5%. Right. It was an astonishing atrocity against young girls in China. And you're right, it was a human rights abuse. And if there was something we could have done to stop it and prevent my great-grandmother from living her entire life hobbled and unable to walk, and a lot of her sisters and friends from dying because of this horrific practice, we should have stopped it. But something that's happening in China and that's starting to happen in the United States as well is that we realize just because a being is weaker than us and more vulnerable than us does not mean we should take them, use them, commodify them, sell them, mutilate them, and ultimately kill them. And so that's something that probably you and I can agree on when it comes to little girls in China. Am I right?
I agree on equal treatment of all human beings. Yeah. Absolutely.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So then the question is, what does torturing animals do to help the human beings who are suffering in China?
I don't support torturing animals in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I also don't see how this is relative to what we can do to improve human lives in the United States. We have human lives that are being tortured in the United States as well. We have people going hungry every single day for no reason whatsoever. And typically that's because the farmer has been tied up in implementing technology so that we can produce more food with fewer resources impacting, making food affordability a bigger issue for 330 million Americans. That's what drives me every day.
Yeah, and I saw you post about this on your Facebook page that you had someone, I think, from Boston talking about food affordability, which is
Diane
great.
Sullivan. She's the nation's leading advocate for food affordability.
Yeah.
Thanks for following along, Wayne. That was good.
Hey, I like your Facebook page and I follow it. I don't agree with it, and I think a lot of the things you say and do are wrong, but I know you feel the same way about me. And the only way for us to get to the truth is for us to have real conversations with each other. But I think the question of affordability and sustainability is a great one. And one of the reasons I think this fur ban is such a crucial piece of legislation is because, among other institutions, the World Bank has declared the fur industry one of the top 5 polluters in terms of heavy metals. And if you know anything about heavy metals, so you and I are old enough to remember all the lead scares that 20, 30 years ago, we were really concerned about lead in the soil, lead in the water that's poisoning our kids and making kids sick. And if you have an industry that is frivolous, it's not necessary, and that's poisoning the water, poisoning the air, poisoning the soil, and making kids sick in places like China, you just said you don't care whether it's a kid in China or a kid in the United States. Everybody's equal. So if we're trying to protect, the animals and the people, the best thing for us to do is just eradicate this industry. Am I right? Trent, did I lose you?
I'm not sure if that was me, but yes, our connection was gone for a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to make a modification to my phone and maybe that'll help.
Okay. I don't know if you heard what I just said about the fact that the fur industry has been listed by the World Bank as one of the top 5 polluters of heavy metals.
I heard that part.
Okay. And so if we are concerned about the little girls in China and the kids in China who have to drink the water, who have to harvest from the soil of the pollution.
Right.
And again, this is an industry that's completely unregulated in China. They dump the waste from the treatment and processing of the fur coats, the waste from the animals themselves, right into drinking water reservoirs that little kids in rural villages have to drink. So, what I'm trying to say is I appreciate your concern for the kids in China and the kids here in the United States who deserve the right to live and the right to eat and the right to have good and happy lives. But what I'm saying is the fur industry is ravaging not just the animals, but the human beings as well. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think we have to go to China to find that, because as mayor of Trenton, New Jersey, Cory Booker and his and the wherewithal in that city decided not to fix a lead contamination problem and just decided it was too expensive.
Yeah.
How do you make that decision and say, we know we're going to poison these kids? School children and schools have even thrown a red flag saying this is a problem. You can't just continue to allow this to happen. And yet it does right here. We don't have to go to China. Why do people like Cory Booker let that happen?
That's a good question. And I don't know enough about the Cory Booker case to say, but I hear you. And what I would say is let's stop lead contamination in the United States, and let's stop heavy metal poisoning of kids in China as well. And the best way for us to do this in the United States, we can't regulate what's happening in China. What we can do is say, we're not going to allow you to sell these products here, because the products we're buying, the sable hat that you're wearing right now, is fueling the poisoning of kids in China. So
I disagree with you. You cannot verify that.
I can't say that directly. I don't know where your sable hat comes from, but I do know as a general matter, China is now the largest fur producer in the world. It's the fastest growing as well. It's grown by something like 100% even in the past 5 years. And all the fur coats, all the fur hats we're buying in the United States, before you know it, most of them are going to be coming from China because their labor costs are low, because they have no regulations, and because when they pollute, those companies don't have to pay a bill because the government doesn't care. The government does not care at all if the local waterways are being poisoned, doesn't care if the animals are being tortured, doesn't care if dogs are being stolen from blind people to make fur coats and fur hats and fur trinkets for people in the United States, because all they care about is commerce.
And what does China do to pollute the waterways in the production of organic soybean meal for the United States? Because all of our organic soybean meal consumed in the United States, primarily through products like tofu and human consumable products, is produced and imported from China.
Yeah, you're right.
So is that any different?
It isn't any different, and that's why we have to stop all of this. But, I think you and I both know that most of the soy that's being produced and most of the grains being produced in this world today, including in China, are being fed back to animals, including animals in fur farms. Right.
Actually, 90% of the soybean meal crush goes into animal feed.
Yep.
That is driven, though, by soybean oil, which is going into the human population.
Yeah. So what we would not disagree about, and we could disagree about the specific number, is that animal agriculture is a huge and growing component of the use of soy. And all these plant-based products that I'm not going to disagree with you that there are problems in plant-based agriculture too. There are animals that are tortured. There are humans that are mistreated on the farms. There's pesticides that are flowing into the water and polluting the drinking water for kids in China and kids in the United States too. But what we can say, I think, is that the use of animals is a huge and growing component of that. And I can tell you from personal experience that back 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, before Smithfield was bought out by a Chinese company, they didn't have all the factory farms in China that we have here in the United States, and that's changing. And the same is true of the fur industry. The reason China is becoming the world's largest fur producer is because they have massive facilities that don't just have 50 or 100 animals. This is a facility that has 20, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 fox and mink on them. And all these animals are tortured. The pollution that flows from these facilities is getting to the drinking water reservoirs. And the same little girls that you're worried about being killed in China are now being killed by the fur industry. And so what I would ask you to do is, as you would support those little girls who are being killed by the one-child policy, support us in fighting for those little girls and for the animals and banning fur across the entire globe. Not just in California. Let's ban fur even in Nebraska, where you are. How do you feel, Trent? No?
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
We're not going to ban it anywhere in the United States. And I do give you credit for one thing, Wayne. Yeah. You're very good at taking something that has nothing to do with the fur business in California and making it sound like it's applicable. Because what's going on in China, that's what you did last time, and that's a common practice, is talk about something that's happening far away and how grave it is and how dangerous it is, and you here are feeling the impacts. My Russian sable came from North Dakota, by the way. Yeah. I've got a buddy that makes all of my fur, and I think you'd be surprised if you knew how much fur garments and products that are produced right here and grown. How many fur? I've been on mink farms. Yeah. I've been on many friends' farms who have mink. They're taken care of properly. At the end of their life, they are harvested. That fur goes into a system, and it provides an essential of life for people. Yeah. We have not been above 10 degrees, Wayne, for the past 2 weeks. Our wind chills have been 20 below. It is really nice to have a Russian sable and a coyote coat to keep you warm.
It's nice.
They serve a purpose.
It's nice, but it's not necessary. And
it is not.
In California, well, it's not, because I don't have one, and I've been in negative 20-degree temperature, and my family in China lives in very cold
what were you
weather.
wearing?
I usually don't wear a hat at all, but I can wear a nice Gore-Tex coat that's sustainable, that's environmentally friendly, and doesn't involve any sort of cruelty to animals. And Gore-Tex is warmer than fur. But you brought a point up that I think is a good point,
Whoa,
right?
whoa, whoa,
Actually,
whoa,
let me
wait,
just.
wait.
I just want to acknowledge a good point you made.
Before we go to your point,
Please go ahead.
that Cortex is made from petroleum.
You're right. And so we've got to control the fossil fuel industry too.
You're choosing petroleum over a Russian sable.
I'm choosing less harm over more harm. In the long term, what we'd like to do with Gore-Tex and fur is create non-extractive practices that don't involve cruelty to any animal, including human beings. But I agree with you. I'm not saying fossil fuels. I mean, if we're trying to have a purity contest, I say we all lose, because the problem isn't that you're buying products that are completely ethical and are unethical, and I'm buying products that are ethical. I'm not a better person than you are, Trent. In many ways, you're smarter, you're better looking, you got a nicer mustache than I have for sure. So I'm definitely not a better person.
I'm not going to sign up for no lineup to see who's better looking, Wayne. Just leave that out of the equation.
All right.
I am drinking my favorite chemical, though. It's pesticide, otherwise known as caffeine. So you don't mind if
I don't feel good about that. I mean, I don't want you to drink any pesticides. I don't want kids in China to drink pesticides. But the point you made is a good one, which is...
You don't drink caffeine either?
I don't drink caffeine. I've never drank... I mean, I drink caffeine very, very infrequently, maybe like one cup of coffee because someone forces it on me once a year. But I've basically never drank alcohol, never done any drugs. I'm the opposite of the Berkeley hippie you're probably stereotyping me as. Because
now we know what's wrong with you, Wayne. We've finally got to the root of the problem. You don't drink enough pesticide. Have some coffee. Chill out.
Yeah, my brain is too clean from the lack of pesticides. But the point you made that I think is a good one is that you basically alleged that I was in a bait and switch argument, right? I'm saying, oh, look at these horrible things in China, and therefore let's challenge fur in the United States.
You're very good at it too.
No, and what I would say is two things. I think that is a good point. So I'll say two things. One is the global economy is now intertwined. For better or for worse, global capitalism is ascendant, and what happens in China affects what happens here. What happens in the United States affects what happens in China. And for me, well, this is a country that's 6,000 miles away, a 20-hour plane trip away. For me, this is very vivid and real because I've actually been at the site of the slaughterhouses and farms where these animals. I've been in the markets in China where they've got cats and dogs crammed into cages. They have these 5 foot by 5 foot crates where they'll stuff 6 to 7 dogs. Were sometimes transported 48 hours away in a truck, not given any food and water, and when they die, it's a brutal and horrific death. And after they slaughter the animals, they use their pelts and sell them in the markets, and they use their flesh and eat them. It's in many ways you'd love this because they're using the entire animal, and they even use the bones. They use everything, right. In these markets. But this is something very vivid and real and personal for me. What I would say is the practices that are happening in China are not systematically different from the practices that happen in the United States at fur farms, including maybe your friend's fur farm in North Dakota. But we could talk about that in a moment. The other reason I think your argument is correct is that it's often the case that we use the practices in other nations to demonize a practice or an industry or pattern where we're just as deeply implicated in it. And I think you're right that I should not just be talking about China, which is why I hope we can move the conversation to the United States. Because I'm Chinese myself. I'm not trying to demonize or make it seem like the Chinese people are in some way different or worse than us. I think it is the same here in the United States. If we want to really get into the vegan meat and the vegan potatoes of the matter, let's talk about fur farming here and why the ban is the only way to create a humane society. Because whether it's in China or the United States, fur is an inherently cruel product. But why don't we start by saying, why do you said your friend harvests these sables, these mink. What do you mean by that? Can you tell me specifically what that means? Harvesting? What does a slaughter process actually look like? Have you seen it?
I have. I confused you though, and that was my fault. A friend of mine makes these. He hunts. He does not raise mink or sables. He made this particular one and gave it to me. I've been on friends that have mink farms in Iowa and in Utah, and I know there are quite a few really good ones all across the country. And what they continue to do in the value, particularly of mink, we'll talk about mink because I believe today it's the high end fur that sells still in the marketplace, and what we have the most of in the United States. They're the natural recyclers. This is a renewable product. We like things that are renewable, and this. The sable, or in the case of the mink, they consume byproducts from chicken plants, byproducts from so many other food plants around this country that they keep the system going. They prevent waste, as you were talking about with the dogs in China, which, by the way, just to point out, I have no clothing made of a dog or a cat, just in case you were wondering, nor do I want one.
I appreciate
that.
But
they're natural recyclers.
Mhm.
And you look at what their contribution, not only to the economy, because I know your audience doesn't care about the economy,
Mhm.
but we care about making sure that everything is in harmony. This is perfect harmony.
Mhm.
Because if it was not for the fur business, quite frankly, these mink would be extinct.
Yeah.
99% of all species that exist, that ever did exist, have become extinct. The species that we continue to manage and to cultivate and to harvest and continue with the cycle of life continue to contribute to making the world a better place, i.e., the earth better, and improving human lives.
Yeah.
And that's the main point that I want to get to the forefront, is that they all serve a purpose. It's just not about torture and cruelty and wearing something to show off with. While I admit there are people that wear fur simply because they think it's an ego boost, that's their choice. And the mink or the fur-bearing animal contributed to improving all of those things, including human lives. And you take a city like you were referencing my loose from the hip, San Francisco was based upon the fur trade. That's what built the city to begin with. That's what it even got its name.
Mm-hmm.
And for people in California to turn their back on something that is so natural and such a huge part of improving the planet and improving human health is just one-sided. It's completely blind to the big picture that we live in.
So let me just kind of try and unpack the things you said, because I think you said a lot of things there. I think the first point you made, which would be a good point if it were true, is that the animals are natural recyclers, and this is actually a sustainable industry because we're taking all the waste products from, for example, chicken feed and giving it to mink and fox, and therefore, we're actually doing something good for the environment. The second point you made, if I recall correctly, is that these animals would be extinct if not for the fact that we're harvesting them by the millions from the fur industry. So we're actually doing something good for them by using their skins in the fur industry. And the third point you made is that San Francisco and the Bay Area and maybe California are built off the fur industry. So how can we possibly reject it now? Am I getting that right? I think those are the 3 points.
You did very well.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So let me try and unpackage each of these, because I think each of these points would be an interesting point if they were valid, but I think they're not valid. So with respect to the first point, do you know who Stephen Harris is? The chance, Professor
No.
Stephen Harris. So he's not an animal rights activist.
I do.
Okay.
I do, yeah.
Professor Stephen Harris is a professor of ecology who's looked at the fur industry probably more carefully than anybody. And from what I understand, he's not an animal rights activist. I don't think he's a vegan or a vegetarian. He's a professor. And the University of Bristol in the United Kingdom is one of the best universities in the world. They do peer-reviewed research that's vetted very carefully. And Stephen Harris has done repeated research finding that this industry, whether it's fox or mink, is inherently unsustainable. Not just because of the heavy metal pollution that's happening when you actually treat the coats, because it's not just about raising the animal, it's about processing and treating the coats so they're not biodegradable. Because otherwise, if you throw a fur coat on the wild and you don't treat it, the fur coat will decompose, just like all organic material. What you have to do is use formaldehyde, all sorts of sulfates, use chromium to treat the coats to make sure that the coats actually can be preserved. And at the end of the day, the amount of energy that's going into these coats is massively higher than the energy that's used to produce a non-fur alternative. So I think just as a factual matter, your first statement, while it might be the case that there's some waste products that are used in the fur industry, there's a lot more waste created by the industry. And it's not just the heavy metals and pollutants that are used in the treating process, it's the shit and the feces. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have sworn. I'm trying to swear less. I was a litigator in Chicago for many years, and I picked up some bad words. I'm going to try not to use those bad words on
Facebook.
Facebook
Put you on the radio now, Wayne,
know,
because there's 7 words.
Yeah, all right. I apologize to everyone on Facebook Live. I messed up.
You also can't be an American Indian because they tanned buffalo hides, they tanned coyote hides. They did all of those things without any degradation to the environment.
They did those things not on the scale that we're doing them now, and because they had to, not because they chose to, not because, you said yourself just a moment ago that a lot of people are wearing these coats. You said yourself, and these aren't my words, these are your words. You said a lot of people are wearing these fur coats for big egos. And we live in a country where there are enough.
I didn't say a lot. I said there's no doubt some
of them. Are you one of them, Trent?
I wear a fur when I need to keep warm.
Okay, so not for big ego purposes.
I have no ego.
That's good to hear. You and I alike. We're both the most humble people in America.
Hey,
right?
my lie meter just went up a little bit, Wayne. I don't know what that is.
Just like Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump. He's the most humble person after the two of us. We're the top 2 humble people, and then our president is number 3.
He's the most humble person I've never met. Yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my point is, you could say whatever you want about sustainability. I could say whatever I want to say about sustainability. the real facts come from science. We have to look at the world the way it is, and the science is very clear on this, that fur is a very unsustainable industry that not only poisons kids, but that wastes a huge amount of energy. So if we want to reduce our footprint on the world, we've got to move towards sustainable and ethical products like faux fur. So your second point.
Which is made of what?
Made of what?
Yes.
Well, it's made out of all sorts of products which aren't perfect, but we can't let perfection be the enemy of the good. If you're trying to lose 30 pounds, you can't say, I only lost 20 pounds, so I'm going to give up. I'm going to start eating fast food again, right? You got to say, hey, maybe I haven't lost 30 pounds yet, but I lost 20, and that's great. And the same is true.
The problem with your theory, Wayne, is that you're telling us that fur, a natural recycler, is unsustainable, but yet wanting us to go to petroleum-based products, which a whole list of people, not including me, say is unsustainable.
But petroleum is being used by the fur industry. How much petroleum do you think it takes to ship all those fur coats from China to the United States? How much petroleum does it take to clean up all the water, all the air that's being polluted with heavy metals by the fur industry? But my point isn't, let's not quibble over the details. Let's just commit together to look at the science. If we're committed to creating a more sustainable industry, I will swear to you today that if the industry comes out and can prove scientifically that they're more sustainable, I still won't support the industry, but I will not go around saying false facts about the industry. But the facts we have before us now,
those exist today.
I agree.
I don't have them on the top of my head, but I will post them on this. I assume you're going to archive this.
Yeah, we will archive this. This will be on the Facebook page. You can post, and I will go on Facebook Live. If you can give me solid, peer-reviewed scientific research showing that fur is actually more sustainable, then I will talk about it. But you're not going to find that because it doesn't exist, and all the research shows the opposite. Your second point about the fact that these wild animals wouldn't exist.
At least you're open-minded about it, Wayne.
I'm open-minded about everything.
You told me you would post it, but you said it doesn't exist.
I said what doesn't exist?
You said that you would post it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist.
Well, yeah, you're right. I don't think it exists.
When you find it, just send it to me and we'll make it available.
I stand corrected. When you find it, send it to me and I'll make it available to my audience.
Does
that sound good? All right.
Yep.
So this is, it's good to get corrected sometimes. And I think this shows that, no matter how I disagree with you about the fur industry or the meat industry, there's some things you said, and I said this last time too, where you can correct me. And I remember last time we had a call, I still remember this. I think I said the University of Iowa, and you said, no, you're wrong, it's Iowa State. Or maybe it was the opposite. And so there are things we can learn from each other, even when we disagree, even when we think there's ethical problems with the other side's perspective. We got to be humble enough to learn from each other. And last time, I think we did do this. But we did.
You really surprised me in how well your retention is being a vegan, because usually vegans can't remember anything and they have no mental capacity for cognition. So you surprised me.
Well, then I'm proving you wrong. Maybe you should update your hypothesis about vegans, because I think from the literature, if you look at the actual literature on vegans tend to be healthier. They're smarter. I'm a lot older than you might think. Do you know how old I am, Trent? How old do you think I am?
28.
So I just proved to you. I'm almost 40, Trent. So I'm almost 40.
But Wayne, you're in a bad streak because vegans are dying left and right. I had a vegan on my Rural Route program yesterday that nearly died. So now she's become as a huge advocate. Eat meat, be happy. You probably know of Kim.
I have heard of Kim.
There was a scientist today in the UK who is documenting that you cannot get enough macronutrients from the vegan diet. You're getting behind the eight ball, Wayne. I'm worried about you.
No, I'm almost 40 years old, and you thought I was 28 years old. You just conceded that I had pretty good retention from our last call. So more importantly than my example or Kim's example or your example is the scientific research. And I think the scientific research shows very clearly that people thrive and benefit from a vegan diet immensely. But with respect to your second point,
why are the Chinese leaving it rapidly?
Leaving veganism?
Yes.
Well, they're leaving it because
increasing meat consumption and eggs. Left and right.
And the reason is because they're being duped by McDonald's and Smithfield and Burger King and KFC. And I think, last time you and I agreed that you're not a big fan of Smithfield either. And Smithfield,
I'm not.
Smithfield has taken over China. Right
I
now.
didn't like them before they were owned by WH Holding Group, and now I like them less.
Good.
But I respect what they do. There's a difference. I respect what they do.
I don't respect poisoning local waterways. I don't respect torturing animals.
They don't do that in the United States.
No, they do it in China, and they do it in the United States too. If you looked at what happened with Hurricane Florence in North Carolina and all the manure lagoons,
I was there.
Overflowing.
I went to the Neuse River, Wayne, after the hurricane, because I had another mutual nemesis of mine named Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Who told me that.
Did you just put me on the level of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.?
As a nemesis? Yeah. And he told people that anybody who stepped foot in the Neuse River would get brain cancer because of that hurricane.
Yeah.
And so I went to the Neuse River. I stuck my foot in the Neuse River. And guess what? 17 years later, I still don't have brain cancer. But the other part that gets left out of that, Wayne, 3 hog farms spilled into that river.
Mm-hmm.
Over 70 city municipalities and their full waste discharged into that river. That never gets any headlines. But everybody wants to talk about those 3 hog lagoons.
It's because the hog lagoons pose a specific and distinct threat to the human population, including antibiotic resistance, disease, and chemicals that are used in hog production that people don't put into their own toilets and their own. I mean, I don't know how many
Are
antibiotics.
You kidding me?
Are you flushing antibiotics down your toilet?
Let's go look at the San Francisco water supply. I guarantee you it's got more estrogen than you could ever get from anything at Whole Foods.
Yeah, I'm less worried about the estrogen that might be in the San Francisco waterway than I am about the MRSA that's killing 20 to 30,000 kids, including kids in the surrounding community of North Carolina pig farms right now. And again, this is not speculative. It has absolutely everything to do with the pig farms, and I will give you some studies to prove that because MRSA rates are sometimes 6 times higher in the immediate vicinity of a pig farm. If you don't know what MRSA is, you know what MRSA is, right, Trent?
Oh, absolutely, I do.
It's a horrible disease.
And I know that everybody has MRSA.
Everyone has some level of MRSA, but not everyone has pathogenic MRSA that is untreatable by last resort antibiotics. And we know now, because of pig farming, there was a study done just a couple years ago in China showing that our last resort antibiotics in China.
Wayne, you never use scientists or science from the United States. It's either UK, it's China, it's somewhere, Zimbabwe. It's never Iowa State.
Well, here's some science from the United States. The Center for Disease Control is now saying that 70 to 80% of all antibiotics in the United States are being used not by human beings, but by animals. And we know that the more we use antibiotics, the more resistance is bred, and the more likely
CDC
it is.
Did not say that.
CDC actually did say that.
No.
And I will send you a report.
No.
We're getting far
It's the
afield
Union
the point,
of Concerned Scientists. Wayne, you continue to take the facts and misplace them. The Union of Concerned Scientists said that. That's not the CDC. And what they said was that we've calculated all of the available antibiotics to animals. We assume everybody uses the maximum amount of every labeled antibiotic, and so consequently, it's 70%.
Yeah,
and that's incorrect.
The CDC endorsed the report, and I will share with you the statistics from the CDC and the reports from the CDC indicating the CDC, which is the organization of the U.S. government. Not that I trust the U.S. government on everything, but it is the organization that focuses on preventing antibiotic resistance. They are the organization. You told me you were going to be in prison
by now. How's the U.S. government doing in that regard?
Not so well, because I'm still free, right?
Yeah, what's the deal there? Don't you have 17 charges?
I think it's more like 15, actually. Give me some credit. Come on. It's not 17 yet. I'm at 15 felonies. But I plan to win all of them, and I plan to talk in a compassionate, peaceful way, even with the prosecutors and farmers who are trying to put me in jail, because I think I've got a lot to learn from them. And if I have to spend some time in jail so I can stew on and learn the lesson that they have to impart on me, I'm happy to do that, because we as Buddhists believe that sacrifice and suffering is part of enlightenment and part of our own personal development. But I want to come back to the main point.
I want to just add to that, though.
Okay, last point, and then let's come back to fur, all right? Because we promised people a fur live stream, not Buddhism and government repression and factory farms in North Carolina. But go ahead.
I'm just following your lead. Nobody in my community, the farm and ranch community, who produce 9 billion animals a year, is opposed to what we're doing here today, implementing our First Amendment right, discussing these things, the freedom of speech. What we have an issue with is you coming onto our property without permission, stealing things. They're not yours. That's also a violation of the Constitution. Yeah. That's what we have an issue with.
Yeah.
Let's have this discussion. Let's talk about things. Let's try to enlighten people, but not be criminals.
Yeah, I understand. And, I don't want to go too far afield the topic, but, I'd reiterate that we have not only constitutional, but statutory defenses to everything we did. And just like taking a dog from a hard car is not theft. If the dog is dying, removing an animal who's sick and dying in a factory farm is not theft. And but let's get back to the original point. And I think our live stream is messing up for some reason. And
it's not very good, right?
Hey, Matt. So there's Matt. Matt, our live stream appears to have died. It's not showing up at all. I don't know what's going on here. But if anyone's still watching, maybe you can hear us at least. But it says connect your live stream to live API. Maybe it's going live again. I think we're back on the air, Trent. So I think we're back on the air, and I'm going to talk about the second point you made about all the wild animals going extinct if not for fur farming. So Trent, do you know that mink are still in the wild today? I assume you know that.
I do.
Okay. And you know that foxes, including Arctic foxes and the red American fox, are still in the wild today.
I do.
Okay, so isn't that just kind of foolproof evidence that these animals still exist? They're still out
Why
there.
are they
They're still thriving.
Why are they in the wild?
They're in the wild partly because we've stopped the fur industry from capturing all of them and harvesting all of their skins.
No, that's not true.
I think
They're in the
that's-
wild because farmers and landowners provide 75% of the habitat for all wildlife. And we have a healthy population of wildlife today, thanks to the farmers and ranchers in the areas that produce things that benefit not only the animals that we harvest, but the wildlife. And that creates opportunity for hunting. And that creates opportunity for the ecosystem to flourish and remain in balance. And that's where we disagree, is that you and I disagree.
Yeah.
You cannot have proper balance without human management and having a hunting season. That's vital to a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah. I don't say this very often, but I think I literally disagreed with every single word you said over the past 2 minutes. Like, I didn't agree with a single thing.
Finally, we got to where we needed to be.
Yeah, because I usually agree with something you said, but I just disagree with everything. And I think John Muir and every ecologist I've talked to, I mean, John Muir 150 years ago, or whenever he started the Sierra Club in the Yosemite Valley in the late 19th century, I think it was, said livestock is the greatest threat to the environment. It's the greatest threat to the pristine.
You know what?
And
Theodore Roosevelt said was the greatest threat to the environment?
I don't.
1907, in fact, he said the greatest challenge to the environment is the urbanization of our thinking and not understanding that all of these animals have a place and that all of these animals and ecosystems need to be managed. Let's go look at the West. 13 states which have ownership. Nevada, my favorite one to talk about, 87%. I enjoy visiting Nevada. I was just in Nevada twice in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
The wildlife is completely disappearing. Wildfires are taking over because the federal government has had too much of the same thought process that you're sharing with us here today, that everything is better just left to its own accord and be out and be wild. Mother Nature always brings about a correction, and what the correction has been is increased wildfires, decreased habitat, and fewer animals and wildlife than ever in the state of Nevada. Yeah. And it can all be prevented if we just manage the resource better. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about. And why I said what I said before you disagreed with me.
Yeah, so I like what you said right there, and I don't disagree with Teddy Roosevelt about his statement that the urbanization of America is part of the reason we're destroying our environment, because the fact that people are so disconnected from natural spaces, the fact that they're so disconnected from animals, is one of the reasons factory farms thrive. Because when you actually show people a factory farm, whether it's a factory fur farm or a factory meat farm, no one can say this is natural, and no one can say this is at all defensible or sustainable for the environment. So I think if we're actually concerned about urbanization, one of the most distorted and most disgusting processes that has led to the world we're in today in terms of urbanization is the industrialization of agriculture. I'm not saying that I agreed with an individual killing one dog or one cat or one mink back 500 years ago when they were harvesting animals for food and for fur for necessity reasons. I, as a Buddhist, believe we should do no harm to anyone. So even if it's necessary, even if you had to kill another human being or another animal to save your life, I think we shouldn't do it. But there is a big difference between that scenario 500 years ago and the scenario we're in today, where people are harvesting millions and millions of animals at a single facility. They're harvesting tens of and sometimes hundreds of thousands of animals in fur farms at a single facility that is very far from natural or wild or pristine in any way. It's dirty, it's contaminated, it's urban, it's industrial. And so if we're actually concerned with the urbanization of America, one area where we should be concerned is the urbanization and industrialization of the treatment of animals, because animals are not commodities, they're not machines, they're not cogs in this huge factory that we call human civilization. They're living creatures who deserve respect, and I think you and I agree on this. But my main point is, last time
we agree that they deserve respect, and I give every animal respect. And I can tell you that I've owned animals, and that's the part that you left out, is I own those animals, and in my ownership of 52 years, me being older and wiser than you, I've understood that I am providing the lowest impact stress life today for my animals by controlling the environment than ever before.
Let's talk about stress.
That's what you ignore.
Let's talk about stress, because one of the things you said last time we talked is factory farmers and the farmers of this nation are doing something good for the animals, because by holding them inside, we keep them safe, right? Because
we protect them.
They're domesticated animals. If they go out in the wild, they're going to starve to death, or they're going to get eaten alive by some predator, right? So you're you're enhancing life. You're promoting welfare and protecting the lives of
I'm
animals.
minimizing stress.
Right. So one of the reasons I was surprised you came out so full-heartedly in favor or against the fur ban is because the situation with fur farming is very different. These are not domesticated animals. These are not animals that are used to confinement. They're not animals that are even used to being around human beings. We're talking about wild foxes and wild mink. And do you know the statistics on what percentage of mink can actually even respond to human touch in a fur farm without freaking out and going crazy and biting the hand that comes to feed them? I'm just curious. This is a statistic from the industry.
I don't know the statistic, nor do I believe I will have much value in what you tell me it is.
So we know like a dog or a cat, right? If you go and pet a dog, you touch a dog, what percentage of dogs are going to bite you just for touching them?
I have no idea.
It's pretty low. I mean, because dogs are domesticated animals. So living in an indoor barn, living in a house, well, of course you should let your dogs out. You should take them on a walk. Confining them in an indoor facility is not necessarily.
I was going to nail you for that, confining your dog. I caught you there.
I mean, we shouldn't. You should let your dogs outside. They should go outside and they should have some freedom too. But a domestic dog is very different from a wild fox or wild mink. And the statistic is, of all the mink out there, and this is an industry stat, because they need to know themselves to keep themselves safe. Like, how many of these mink can actually handle human interaction without freaking out and having like stress levels skyrocket, biting themselves, thrashing their bodies against their own cage? It's 2%. Only 2 out of 100 mink can handle even human touch or human interaction without having an aggressive or aversive response. So 98% of these animals, every time a human being is walking up and down those aisles, giving them food or water or harvesting an animal, they're living in an insane level of stress and fear. And again, this isn't me saying this. This is the industry itself saying this, because they have to keep their employees safe. And so they warn their employees, just so you know, these are wild animals. We're going to freak out the moment you touch them, right? So when you talk about treating animals with respect, giving them safety and welfare, this is very different from factory farms. Not that I'm agreeing with you at all on factory farms, but I'm surprised you don't agree with me about wild animals. Because if you and I both agree that wild animals should be respected, confining, do you know how big a mink's cage is her entire life?
I've been there.
Do you know how many square feet it is?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
No, it does not matter.
Why doesn't it matter if we're trying to give the animals respect?
Because the mink also has that same level of stress you just described, caused by other mink.
Yeah, but they're not living.
And when you put them in the wild, inside of a farm, whatever the case may be, that's just the way the mink is wired.
Yeah.
And when you put them in that cage that they're in, it's a condo. Yeah. And the condo is all about protecting them from the weather, mink, they don't thrive really well when it's extremely cold, even though they're built to provide that warmth when you put them in a controlled environment, you give them adequate feed, water, and protection from the weather and protection from other mink on a daily basis. That minimizes the stress. That's what it's about.
Yeah. So let me just point out a couple things about this. So you're describing a mink's cage as a condo. And you didn't know exactly the parameters of a mink's cage. I'll tell you them right now. The industry average, and this isn't me as an animal rights activist, this is the industry saying, like, how much space do we give an individual mink? It's about 2 square feet. A little more than 2 square feet of space. So, it's like a large piece of paper. Do you know how much space mink usually range in on a daily basis in the wild?
Why?
I'm just trying to give a comparison to our audience.
No, why do they range in that much? It doesn't matter whether it's 200 miles or 2,000 miles. They do that because that's how big of a circle they have to run in to, number one, stay away from their predators, stay away from other mink, and number two, find something to eat. Well, they only need 2 square feet in a cage because everything they need in terms of protection and food is right there for them.
So I'm going to answer the question for you. The answer is probably something like 2 square miles. So
I did answer the question.
An animal that is given 2 square feet of space in a cage in the wild gets 2 square miles. So another point to make.
But you
I have a condo
in
Chicago.
2 square miles is for their own survival.
For their own
and
survival,
you put
but also
cage, they don't need it.
But they do. I mean, animals want to explore their environments. They want to play. They
want
to walk around. So, do you think you'd be willing to live in 2 square feet of space?
I'm not a chicken. I'm a human being.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So,
I personally, Wayne, don't want to live in a condo in San Francisco, or I don't want to live in Nancy Pelosi's commune behind her wall. But that's my choice as a human being. I'm not a chicken.
Does Nancy Pelosi have a commune now? Is that the new thing?
She has a commune. She has a wall around her little commune, but yet she don't want to protect our nation's borders.
Are you sure that's not the U.S. Congress? I'm pretty sure that's what they call that. She's the Speaker of the House, not the Speaker of the San Francisco commune.
I think both.
Both. All right. So the U.S. Congress is your commune. So I like this example of a condo because, first of all, I'd say a condo as big as my own body is not a very charitable condo. But the second thing I'd say is if I actually have a condo in Chicago, Trent, just so you know, I mean, it's underwater,
But
so I'm not.
you're
I'm
never
not happy
there.
about it. I'm not there very often, but I used to live in Chicago, and I've got a condo there. I have to have it because it's underwater, and I have to pay the bank. It's a terrible situation. I bought it in 2007. Big mistake. Never make the mistake that I made. Don't buy a condo before you're ready for it. So, this is something I learned the hard way, and some underwater. But if I told you that in my condo, people were chewing their own limbs off and thrashing their bodies against the walls of the condo, would you say that's a very nice condo to live in, Trent?
I will not fall prey, pun intended, to comparing people to animals.
Okay, but let's just talk about the animals themselves then.
Anthropomorphism is not going to play with
If
here.
someone were raising their dog, and dogs and domestic fox or wild foxes and wild coyotes, they only diverged a few thousand years ago. These species can even interbreed. They can mate with each other and have offspring. So these are very similar species. If someone was raising their dog in a 2-foot, or actually to be fair, mink are raised in 2-square-foot cages. Foxes are raised in maybe like an 8-square-foot space because they're a little bit bigger than mink. But if someone were raising their dog in a 3-foot by 3-foot cage, a very small cage that's smaller than a human body, and this dog was chewing her own leg off, would you say, or alternatively, had a condition called bent foot, which happens to real foxes in the fur industry, where their feet,
Correct.
because they get so heavy and they have no exercise, their feet literally become crooked and they can no longer stand. If someone had a dog in a 3-foot by 3-foot cage her entire life, and this dog was chewing her own limbs off, had bent crooked legs from lack of stimulation, and was spinning around in her cage exhibiting signs of insanity and stereotypic behavior, would you say that was a respectful way to treat that dog? Would that be a condo for the dog? Or would that be a cage, imprisonment, and torture that no one should inflict on any
If
dog?
that was happening to my dog, I'd find a solution.
Okay.
Conversely, if that was happening to one of my sows that are here at my place, I would need to find out what is causing this elevated level of stress, and I need to fix it because I cannot have an animal stressed.
Yeah.
And I also know that fox farmers and mink farmers cannot afford the animal to be stressed. And if that is happening with any regularity at all, they need to get it fixed. And I suggest that they are, or they would not continue to be in the business.
Well, let's look at the actual industry figures themselves then. And Stephen Harris has kind of communicated, because the industry does care about these things. I agree that if an animal is ripping her own leg off, she's not going to
find a solution.
Yeah, there's not going to be a very nice fur coat. But so we can actually look at kind of the industry figures and see how many animals are insane. And these animals aren't even in cages for that long. I mean, relatively speaking, the natural lifespan of a fox can be 10, 15 years. They're killed at 9 months. But in that 9-month period, do you know what percentage of them are exhibiting insanity and stereotypic behavior?
No, I do not.
It's 1 out of 5. It's about 20%, which means millions and millions of mink, fox, and other animals.
I'll look that up, Wayne, but I highly doubt that because the farmer could not afford that.
It's Stephen Harris. Well, stereotypic behavior doesn't mean they're necessarily all chewing their legs off. So just
Stephen Harris. So this is UK stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So stereotypic behavior does not mean that they're all ripping their own legs off. So you're right. It's not 20% of the animals are ripping their own legs off. It means 20% are engaged in repeated motions, like they're just spinning around in the cage over and over again. They're biting the bars of the cage repeatedly and not stopping. Their head could be just going up and down, up and down. I mean, you've probably seen video footage of dogs that are in puppy mills or in cages their entire life. They just kind of keep doing this and this and this and this. And interestingly, this happens to human beings too. If you confine a human being in a prison for too long and you're not giving them any stimulation in solitary confinement, they come out and they're emotionally wrecked. They're not even really human beings anymore because they can't think straight. They can't move straight. Their behaviors are all messed up. They're profoundly abnormal and they're suffering immensely. And the reason animals engage in stereotypic behavior, and this is very solid scientists by ethologists, cognitive scientists, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, because human beings engage in stereotypic behavior too. Stereotypic behavior is triggered by stress. And if you look at the cortisone levels of these animals, even the fact that mink are denied water, there's very good evidence that mink, they're aquatic creatures. They usually spend a huge amount of time in the water. These mink that are raised in fur farms never spend a day in the water. They don't have a moment to be in the water. And their cortisone levels are highly increased and elevated because they don't have any access to the water. But even beyond that, the fact that they're confined in a 2-foot cage means they do start engaging in this stereotypic behavior. And for the fur industry, it's just a cost of doing business because when they've tried to domesticate mink and fox, first of all, it's not easy to do. It's not always possible. But when they tried to domesticate these animals, they found their fur coats aren't quite as nice. That there's something about the wild animals, these wild animals who haven't gone through the process of neotenization that is inevitable whenever you domesticate an animal. We can talk about what neotenization is later if people are interested. comment on the live stream if you want to know what neoteny is, but it's not that relevant to this case. But if they try to go through neotenization with fox and mink, their fur coats aren't as nice. And you can't sell them to people in New York and San Francisco to wear nice fur coats. So what are your thoughts on that?
You just answered my thoughts on that. It is not in the best interest of any animal owner to have an animal that is not at minimal level of stress. Everybody has some stress level. Every animal has some level of stress. Our job is to minimize stress, because if I don't minimize the stress on my pigs, on my cattle, on my horses, I'm not going to get what I need for them or for myself to be sustainable.
So
if a fur farmer allows 1 in 5 of his animals to be at that high level of stress, he's not going to be a fur farmer very long.
Yeah.
You cannot afford that.
Yeah.
And as much as we don't want to bring it back to economics, it is about economics. And if you're not taking care and minimizing the stress, you're not going to be profitable. You're going to be gone.
Yeah. So here's one concrete example then. If the fur farmer's job is to minimize the stress for the mink, why aren't they giving them access to water? When this is an aquatic animal and when there is very sound scientific research that mink need water to have their cortisone levels reduced. So you can measure this scientifically. This isn't about your opinion versus my opinion. This is about the scientific facts about raised cortisone levels in mink that are denied access to water.
They would not withdraw water from any period of time that elevated stress levels.
I'm not saying water to consume, because they give them a little bottle. They give them a little bottle to drink water. I'm saying mink as aquatic animals. These are aquatic animals. It's like putting a fish on a pier as opposed to letting them swim around in the water. Mink aren't quite that bad, but they normally spend most of their day swimming and in waterways, covered in water. So
to
if they actually
were from predators.
Well, no, not just to protect themselves from predators, because they
have
a natural. No, this is a scientific fact that cortisone levels increase considerably when mink are denied access to water. In the same way that taking a fish out of the ocean is going to cause their stress levels to increase. So why aren't they given waterways? Why aren't they given a pool? Why aren't they allowed to exhibit their natural behaviors as they would in the wild?
If it was a problem for a stress, they would. Yeah. Obviously, it's not.
Yeah,
it does not affect their performance.
Yeah.
Or they would be given that water.
As much as I'd like to believe that capitalism minimizes stress for animals or human beings, I'm not necessarily a vehement, radical anti-capitalist, but as someone who's worked for a lot of big companies over the years that are a lot more efficient than fur farms, I will say even the Googles and Apples of the world, they love giving their employees a nice lunch. They love having massage parlors.
There you go again, comparing animals to people.
I'm not comparing animals to human beings. I'm saying that you'd think that human employers would be more concerned about the stress of their employees, given human rights concerns and laws regulating misconduct towards human beings. But even Google, their main goal is not to minimize stress for their employees. I know this because I worked for big companies like Google and Facebook and Apple as a securities litigator. I know what the internal deliberations of their CEOs are. What is their one and only purpose, Trent?
Hey, I've had some stuff banned from Facebook. Could you check that out for me, Wayne, and see why, if I could get that back on?
I'll ask my friend about it. Seriously, if you pass it on to me, I believe that people should not be removing stuff.
Every once in a while, I'll get this little red flag that says, this is an animal-oriented content. We do not allow this.
What I'm saying to you, Trent, is your belief that fur farmers' main goal is to minimize the stress for their animals is preposterous, even if we're talking about corporations and their employees. Even Facebook and Google, as much as they call their employees, what is their one and only legal goal? I mean, you should know this. I mean, you're not a lawyer, but you understand what a C Corp is. What is a C Corp's goal?
Profit.
Profit. Exactly. So anytime there's a trade-off between I want to make the point very clearly, just so you understand and our audience understands it. The legal purpose of a corporation, in the vast majority of animal agricultural facilities are corporations, their legal purpose is one and only one thing: to maximize profit. And if they do not do that, their shareholders can sue them and hold them accountable for doing it. So what you said to us as a legal matter is false. The corporation's goal is not to minimize stress for the animals. It's to maximize profit. Let me just finish the point. Okay. And anytime there's a trade-off between profit and stress, they are legally required to choose profit. That's not a good world for us to be in for human beings or for animals. Go on.
That's why they own Google instead of livestock. They couldn't make it. They would go broke and be done.
That's why who owns Google?
People. That's why those people are not in the livestock business. That's why they don't own animals. Because they don't understand the point. My point is that as an animal steward, nothing is more important to me than minimizing stress. And obviously, if the Google CEO and owners are not following this with their own employees,
I see your point.
they are not qualified to own animals, which, by the way, is
Okay.
why we have very few animal owners left in the United States. People just didn't know how to make it work. Consequently, we have fewer animals, fewer people owning animals.
What you're saying is what we have to do is take all these coddled Googlers and put them in cages in a fur farm, and then they'll realize what the real life is. that the fur farmer is going to treat them way better if they're raising them for skin. We just take all these Googlers and put them in fur farms, and they'll realize this is the good life. Larry Page, he doesn't care about me, but the fur farmer, this guy's going to treat me well. Somehow I think that my cousin actually works at Google, and I'll ask her about this, but I'm pretty sure she's not going to trade places with a fox and a fur farm. But
so would she join me on the radio?
What's that?
Would she join me on the radio talking about the working conditions at Google?
She's a private person, and she's probably going to be angry that I even mentioned her today. So,
well, you didn't name her.
I didn't name her. I didn't do that, right. But I'm pretty.
By the way, we did test the cortisone levels of the horses in Central Park.
Okay.
When the idiot who is the mayor, Bill de Blasio, said that his first and primary job was to eliminate the horses out of Central Park.
Yeah, which he failed on. Yeah,
he failed, and I was a big part of that. I don't want to blow my own horn. The people locally, the 300 individuals who take care of those horses every day, made it work. I helped them at every level possible. But the one thing I want to bring up is that he was spouting off about these horses are stressed and they're in this traffic and it's dangerous. And by the way, they lose 114 pedestrians every year in New York City from automobile pedestrian crashes. They've lost one horse in the last 20 years. And so they brought in an expert in equine veterinary medicine, tested the cortisone levels, and guess what? The horses had zero. There was zero level of elevated stress by being in traffic and doing what they do every single day.
I think that's a false comparison. I think you know it, Trent, because there's 20 million people in New York City and there's only, a couple hundred horses. So, saying there's 116 human fatalities and only one horse fatality, you got to look at the denominator too, right? We can't look at the numerator. But I take your point, and I don't know enough about the horse carriage campaign in New York to say, specifically what test was done or
I'm sure they're going to be really happy that I turned you on to them too.
I'm sure they will be. I've got friends in New York City who I'm sure are incredibly furious and probably screaming at the screen right now because, if I were more well informed, I could share some facts from their perspective. I'll ask Donnie and my friends in New York about this and see if they have any different facts than the facts he presented to us today. Last point I want to make, and then we probably should move on because I'm really grateful to you for staying on, and then we'll conclude and maybe take some questions.
Sorry I was late, by the way.
Oh, no worries at all. I mean, life, you're in cold weather. You're not in balmy California, so I understand.
I was breeding 2 sows, and it took longer than it should have.
All right. Well, I wish you didn't do that, but we'll have to talk about that on another occasion. Yep. So your last point, which is, I think, superficially a compelling point, that San Francisco was built on the fur industry, on the trapping industry, on mining too. San Francisco had these traditional... And oil that had these traditional industries that built the city. This is the city of St. Francis, the patron saint of animals. And St. Francis loved animals. And your point was, if we really want to reject the fur industry, we're rejecting our own birth as a city. We're rejecting our own traditions, our own foundations. And what I would say is there were a lot of things that San Francisco was built on. Do you know about what happened in 1871 around the Bay Area?
I maybe know, but I don't know the time frame.
So, most people outside of the Chinese community don't know. There was a massacre of Chinese people that happened in the Bay Area in 1871. And it was one of the things that led immediately to the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. And this massacre was just one small example of a series of examples of the brutal exploitation of Chinese immigrants in railroads and laundries and mines across the entire state of California that ultimately led to human beings being massacred and an entire race of people being banned from this country for almost 100 years. So that is also part of San Francisco's foundation. It is part of the reason the railroads were built. It's part of the reason the buildings in San Francisco went up. It's part of the reason the mines were manned by Chinese immigrants who had no rights, who weren't considered citizens, didn't have the right to be on a jury, didn't have the right to own property, and frankly, didn't have the right even not to be massacred. When the people massacred these Chinese people in Chinatown in San Francisco, there's very little accountability. Not only did they not hold the people accountable who killed these people, 11 years later, they're passing a law to ban Chinese people from the country, saying, hey, the problem here, while all these Chinese people are getting killed, the problem is that we're letting them in the country in the first place. And I think you and I can both agree that massacre was an atrocity. It was not justified. The Chinese Exclusion Act, banning people from this country, selectively saying just because you're of a certain race, we're not going to allow you to even legally immigrate to this country. That's not right. In a country where we believe in equality, you said at the beginning, I believe in equality. It doesn't matter if you're Chinese, or American or European.
Or Japanese during World War II
Yeah,
when they were rounding them up and holding
absolutely.
them
No,
incarcerated. Same thing.
absolutely. Same thing. So my point is, these are traditions that also existed in San Francisco 150 years ago. In fact, they're more recent traditions than the traditions that you're talking about, the use of fur, the use of mining to build the city of San Francisco. And there are some traditions that aren't worth holding on to because traditions can change. And it's not that we don't value our forefathers. It's not that we don't value the foundations of our society, of our city, our community, but there's some things we can hold on to and some things that change. And I think honestly, the same is probably true about you. If I look 20 years ago, what's something about you that's changed in the past 20 years? There probably is something 20 years ago that you did that you don't agree with now. Am I right? There's got to be something.
Boy, I'll take another month or two to think about that one.
So you've been perfect your entire life, Trent.
I didn't say I've been
Yeah.
perfect, but I don't sit here and regret something that I did with regret.
I'm not even saying regretting. I'm just saying there's something that's changed in you. You know, maybe.
Well,
So
of course, we evolve within a species.
Of course, yeah, and as individuals
It's very disrespectful in my mind for you to call San Francisco and a genocide part of the tradition of the city, though.
I think the
Because
discrimination
the
against.
tradition of the city of San Francisco is something that improves lives,
Yeah.
that it improves the lives of the people who call this home. And we
Yeah.
take pride in how we've made this world a better place. We take pride how we've improved opportunities. And quite frankly, why I wear a Russian sable, why I wear leather, why I celebrate the animals that lived on this earth and found a way to make the place better. This is a celebration. It's not a trophy saying, look, we are dominant over you.
Animals, yeah.
It's us living together saying, look,
Yeah.
we've come here together.
Yeah.
And by the way, it all comes to me from a book called the Bible.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the fundamental difference.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I have immense respect for all religious traditions. You know, one of the great things about Buddhism is we believe that all religions have deep truths. And I think that Jesus was a great sage. He believed things that we should learn from him and from one another, like turn the other cheek, engage in no violence towards anyone. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile or African or Asian. We're all equal on this earth. I mean, there are such important lessons for us to learn from Christ and the Bible, and I appreciate those lessons. So I don't think that's the root of it, because I think there's a lot of really valuable lessons. But the point I wanted to make is that these traditions that you're talking about, that you say are not part of San Francisco traditions, they were part of the culture of San Francisco 200 years ago, right? The discrimination against Chinese people, forced labor, paying them nothing, beating them up when they tried to ask for more wages and said, hey, why am I being paid 10 cents on the dollar? You know, why can you compel me to work when you're not compelling a white person to work in the same context? Part of the reason all these railroads were built was because they took Chinese labor, didn't pay them anything, and the American people did benefit from this. But our people suffered. And in the long term, creating an unjust society hurts us all. It hurts the white people, it hurts the Chinese people, it hurts the black people, it hurts the Mexican people, it hurts the animals as well. Because while it might feel nice to be on top of the ladder at one point, and on top of the food chain, once the roles are reversed, and this is what we're seeing in this country today. I mean, one of my critiques to the left right now today is that there have been historical patterns of discrimination, for sure. There are these historical injustices against people of color, against women in this country. But our goal as progressives and as good people in this country, and as people believe in the American dream, is not to invert that power structure and say, okay, you had power over us, now we're going to try and take power over you. We're going to tell you you're a bad person. It's to make all of us equal, to bring us all into a restorative community where everyone can live in peace and harmony with everyone else. And that's true of the animals as well, right? We've been exploiting and using them. We've been dominating them for hundreds and thousands of years. We're not trying to create an animal rights revolution where we arm the cows and the mink and the fox and have them fight back against the human beings who've been killing them. All we're saying is let's treat everyone on this earth with compassion, respect, and decency. And if we do that, we all benefit. Because you never know when you're going to be on the bottom of the food chain and you're the one who some bully is going to want to try and hurt. And I don't want anyone to be in that position.
You know, I remembered most from our first conversation was the impact that your father made with Eli Lilly. Mm-hmm. And thanks to animals and the research that he did, and how many human lives have been improved because we eliminated diseases that otherwise might have gotten you or I.
Yeah.
It's how can we improve human lives at the end of the day? And I thank animals and I celebrate animals for making that possible.
Yeah.
Thanks, Wayne.
Well, I appreciate what you thanking my dad. My dad was an amazing researcher, and I think he did save lives by doing research on diabetes. And you're right, he did experiment on animals, and a lot of the drugs, the insulin that they extracted from pigs, did save lives. But what my dad, and I think my dad is a great example, my dad recognizes, and what I recognize as well as someone who has worked in science most of my life, and I worked in molecular biology laboratories when I was a high school kid and early on in college, is that other ways of doing this. that it's not about choosing between the animals and the human beings, or really, I should say the non-human animals and the human animals, because human beings are animals. It's about creating a just world for us all. And while from a short-sighted perspective, it might seem to be valuable to brutally exploit these animals to obtain scientific knowledge, in the long term, creating a society where we have just and peaceful and compassionate norms towards all is so much more powerful, so much more important to human flourishing than any particular and discrete scientific experiment. Okay, we've been on for a while, so I just want to see if there are any questions. And Matt, maybe you can even chime in and let us know if you see any questions that are good for either me or Trent before we go. I also want to suggest to everyone, please share this live stream. I know Trent's going to share this live stream. After we're done with this live stream, we try to get a cross-posting situation going, but the tech wasn't working out, but Trent's going to share this live stream. I think it was a great conversation. Trent shared some things that I learned from. I hope you all learned from him. Hopefully I shared some things that Trent learned from. So this is a great example of how we can have dialogue, even with folks who we otherwise would consider adversaries. But if you have a question now for either me or Trent, I'm seeing lots of comments. Seems like mostly animal rights supporters now, which makes sense because this is posted on our page, not yours. But I see Noah Gurley saying, choose a better way. Don Maria is saying, I think the animals by skinning them alive and wearing them on my head. Oh, I guess that's a sarcastic comment towards you.
Yeah, I figured as much.
Okay. I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, there's obviously a lot of distress and anger, and people, they don't believe you're speaking in good faith when you say you're thanking the animal. I mean, how do you respond to an animal rights activist who says you can't be serious? You can't be serious about thanking the animal when you just hurt her so brutally.
I didn't hurt the animal so brutally. The animal wasn't skinned alive. The animal was respectfully harvested. We do that with every animal. We care about rendering the animal unconscious immediately, and then we begin the process. And I do every day. I celebrate the life of how animals have improved my fellow citizens and my life.
Yeah.
It's about working together to make the place a better. Here's the news, Wayne, that we're all going to die.
Yeah.
You kill plants
That's
in order to live. You do. A plant has to die.
Yeah.
In order for something to live, something has to die.
Yeah.
There's nothing living that something didn't die to help.
Yeah. But there's a difference between sentient beings and non-sentient beings, right?
Oh, now you want to talk about, we're out of time.
Yeah,
you want to talk about the University of Michigan documenting that plants too have feelings?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to disagree with that. Plants don't have
Well,
nociceptive
that's
cells.
science. That's not China's science. That's U.S. science.
And I think the Cambridge Consensus on Consciousness is very clear. They didn't form a consensus around consciousness of plants. They formed a consensus around consciousness of animals. But someone asked you a tough question. So there is actually someone, Bobby Meir, who's asking me some tough questions too. There's someone saying, why did PETA pay for the torture of live animals? Question. So Bobby, I'm going to be clear about this right now. No animal rights activist would ever support the torture of killing of an animal. And PETA's policy is to kill animals or euthanize animals when it's a last resort. So are there problems in that policy? I don't know. I'm not part of the program. What I will say is their program is intended to alleviate the suffering of animals and make a choice that maybe the animal would have to make herself, if not for the fact that they don't have the tools. From my perspective, I'm not going to stand behind that program. I don't know much about that program. And one thing, Trent was talking about the bait and switch earlier about us using China to attack all the fur industry. And I would say to you, Bobby, your intentions may be good, but attacking one organization when that organization is not even talking before you today, this is not about PETA, this is about the animal rights, this is about the California State Fur Ban, is the same fallacy and logic that Trent accused me of about an hour ago at the beginning of this live stream. But thank you for your comment. I didn't accuse you of it. I called you out on it. You called me out. All right. Thank you very much, Trent.
I got to go, Wayne.
Okay. So thank you very much, Trent, for joining. I'm trying to see. I'll stick around for a little while to see if there are any other questions. But Trent's got to go. I really appreciate you spending this time.
I'll be online, so if people want to, ask me how to get a Russian sable hat, I'll be glad to help them.
I'm sure people will not be asking you that because no one's going to be wearing Russian sable hats in a couple months because they're going to be banned in the state of California and banned across the nation next.
That guy that just came and showed his face in here a little while ago goes back to his homeland where I know exactly where it's at. He'll be wearing a Russian sable because it's been cold at his folks' house.
I don't think that's going to happen, Trent, but I appreciate you being here. So if everyone could please share this live stream, I think Trent and I, while we disagree about a lot of things, we both appreciate you clicking that share button. All you have to do is click that share button and comment that you're sharing, and probably another 10 or 100 people will see this. And if you thought this is a good and productive conversation, I certainly did, then do us both a favor by clicking that share button. So can you all do that for us? I'm trying to see if there are any questions. Trent, you can go ahead and leave if you need to. Alice D is asking. No, it's
See ya.
okay. I'll be in half the screen. I know you got other things. Alice D is asking, harvested. Would you like to be harvested? How about your kids? That is ridiculous. No one needs to wear fur. You're absolutely right, Alice. And these sorts of euphemisms are part of the reason the fur industry is able to sell people these fur coats. Because instead of saying this animal was electrocuted, this animal had her neck stomped, this animal was poisoned with carbon dioxide poisoning, which are the most common ways that animals. Oh, Matt's fixing the camera, so I don't have double screen of myself. They use terms like harvested. And the most common methods of slaughter in the mink industry is CO2 poisoning. They throw them into this box called the knock box. They grab them each by the neck. And these are wild animals. So they're thrashing, they're scared, they're terrified of what's going to happen to them. They throw them all into a box. And then they push CO2 gas into these boxes. And if you know anything about CO2 poisoning, carbon dioxide poisoning causes respiratory spasms. There's acid that forms. Carbonic acid forms in these animals' lungs. They spasm and they collapse and die in a slow and gruesome way. And there's been undercover footage from inside these CO2 boxes before in the past showing animals thrashing around, and it's just a brutal way to die. The most common method that foxes are slaughtered in, and foxes and mink, other than bunnies, are the most common animals used in fur production, is electrocution. And what they do is they grab them by these tongs, have the animal bite down on the tongs, seize them by their neck and their head, and then they put these electric anal probes into their mouth and their anus. And these animals are literally anally or vaginally electrocuted, and they thrash around in agony. And some of them are not properly stunned by the electrocution and will wake up as they're being slaughtered and processed. And you've seen some of this footage probably. If you follow DXC, you've probably seen some of this footage of animals literally being skinned alive. Does it happen to every animal? No, but it happens. It happens because when you treat animals as mere commodities, some of them will be skinned alive. So this is how animals are harvested. And it's not just fox and mink. It's not just these wild animals. It's also domestic bunnies. So bunnies are the third most common companion animal in the United States. 1 billion bunnies are killed for flesh and for fur every year. Every year! And these are beautiful little bunnies, just like the bunnies we have in our own homes. My friend Cassie has a bunny. She adopted her own home. His name is Jonah. He's a beautiful little guy. He loves his mama so much. And these animals are treated savagely, brutally. And we can stop this. We have an incredible opportunity to stop this, but we need your help. So if you agreed with me and not Trent, please share this live stream, because now that Trent's off the live stream, I can say to all of you confidentially that I won that debate. Did I win that debate? I totally destroyed him, didn't I? Is that being cocky to say that? I think it's a little cocky to say that, but I think I did win the debate. He didn't really have that many good arguments. So I think, but the nice thing is, I didn't win this debate because I'm a better person than him or I'm smarter than him. I won this debate because we had the facts on our side. That there are no arguments for brutally mistreating billions of animals, hundreds of millions of animals for a luxury product that no one needs to wear. There's no argument for subjecting animals to unnecessary cruelty. And so I won that debate because the facts are on our side, and you can win the debate too, very easily. All you have to do is get out there and speak out. And the easiest way to get out there and speak out is go to furishistory.org right now and sign up today. Because we need your support. If we are going to ban fur in the state of California and make fur history, not just in California, but across the world, it's going to take grassroots activists and supporters just like you. Sign up. It takes 15 seconds to sign up. It takes 1 minute to make your phone call, do some social media, send an email. It's so easy to do. Go to furishistory.org and you can be a part of this historic campaign to eradicate the abuses of animals in the fur industry. So, any other questions? I don't see any other questions. How can we make these people feel? Paula, well, here's the key thing. I mean, if you saw the live stream, and I think Paula was on this live stream, you notice that Trent in many ways does feel. You know, he was talking about how we want the animals not to have stress. We want the animals to not suffer. We want the animals to have a good natural life. So superficially, you know, Trent agrees with us. He thinks that, I mean, he said that the fur industry's goal is to minimize the stress of the animals, right? And he compared a fur farm to Google as an employer and said, the people at Google are treated worse than the animals in fur farms. So it's not that our values are that different. He thinks that animals at fur farms deserve to be treated as well as employees at Google. It's that the facts aren't on the table. And everything that people in the industry see is seen through this lens, through this filter that distorts their judgment. And the interesting thing is, people saw the same, people were afflicted with the same biases when it comes to other historical cases of oppression. If you look at the way white people treated Chinese people 150, 200 years ago, they said the same thing. They said, yeah, we're beating them up, we're killing them, we're forcing them to work in the railroads, but they'd be even worse off in China. You know, they'd live in some barbaric nation where they'd probably starve to death. So, yeah, we're not treating them the best, but they're still better off than they would have been. And we now know that was a fallacy. That was a complete fallacy, that there was an opportunity for us to treat everyone equally, to treat everyone with compassion, and to treat everyone well and to genuinely minimize the stress of everyone, not just the white people, but the Chinese people too. And eventually people like Trent will recognize that the idea that the only way to help animals is to give them a little better life than the alternative, which is, maybe worse, but probably not, is not to put them in cages for the rest of their lives. We can give the animals the lives they deserve. And what I say all the time is part of our mission as animal rights activists isn't to argue with people, but rather to expand the universe of possibility, to show people like Trent, if you genuinely believe in giving animals good lives, we can give animals much better lives than a life in a cage, in a 2 foot by 2 foot cage or a 3 foot by 3 foot cage. If you genuinely believe in minimizing the animal's stress, we can do better than having 20% of these animals afflicted with stereotypic behavior and insanity because they have no natural stimulation their entire life. We can give the animals the life they deserve. And frankly, even if today we took 1 to 2% of the American economy and devoted it to caring for animals raised in fur farms and factory farms and slaughterhouses, every single one of those animals could be taken out of that abusive environment and given a beautiful life in a sanctuary. That is the world we're trying to create, and that is the world we should be trying to create if we genuinely believe that minimizing the stress of animals is what our goal should be. And this is an area where Trent and I agree that we should be minimizing the stress of the animals. We should be giving the animals the same life that Google gives its employees. And if we get there, folks, we're well ahead of the game. We're well ahead of the game. Okay, I don't think I have any other thoughts or questions. Noah is saying Wayne did a really good job. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Teresa is saying you rock, Wayne. Nyla Rose is the fur. This history thing only for the United States. Nyla, it is not just for the United States. Sign up wherever you are in the world, and you can do social media. You can do emails, even if you're in Europe, even if you're in Asia. We want people all over the world to be advocating for the California fur ban because this is going to set off a chain reaction that will cascade across the world. Aaron Skinner's asking a question. Wayne, how are you able to remain headstrong? I find it hard to not let my empathy overcome me, knowing what is happening every day, and I want to just escape. Well, the key thing for me is expanding that universe of possibility. Again, recognizing that there are terrible things happening to animals, but there is an incredible opportunity for us to help animals too. And I've said this before, many of you who watch these live streams probably heard this. There's a big difference between empathic distress on the one hand and empathic concern on the other. Empathic distress is the feeling you get when you see someone who's suffering and you feel like there's nothing you can do to stop it. And when you're in a state of empathic distress, you run away from the suffering. You hide from it. You say to yourself, oh my gosh, this is too unbearable. I can't bear this. And frankly, even Trent, this farmer, this 6th generation farmer, I think he's suffering a little bit from empathic distress. He doesn't bear the sight of the suffering animals, and so he has to delude himself into thinking the animals are treated well. And that's what he heard on the live stream. He kept saying, animals are treated well. I promise you, the animals are well cared for. They're loving their lives. It's as good as living life in the Googleplex. Like literally, this farmer just compared the treatment of animals who are electrocuted, beaten to death, and skinned in the fur industry to employees at Google who have their laundry done for them and get free massages and video games all day and free food. So it's not that he doesn't think suffering is wrong. It's that he has to hide himself from it because it's too hard to bear. And people respond in different ways. Some people like you, Aaron, have to run from it and just say, I can't bear even looking at this anymore. And that's okay. It's okay to feel that way sometimes. Some people like Trent just delude themselves and say to themselves, okay, this is so terrible and atrocious, I just have to tell another story about what's happening to animals, even if it's a false story. But there's a better place to be in. We don't have to be in empathic distress. And that is what sociologists call empathic concern. And empathic concern is very different from empathic distress because it's not an aversive and negative feeling. It's a positive feeling that causes us to go towards suffering. But the key thing to get us to go from empathic distress to empathic concern is we have to have the tools to actually solve the problem. If we feel like there's suffering here, but I have the tools and capacities as an individual, and we have the tools collectively as a society and a movement to solve the problem of this suffering, then we'll go towards it. It's kind of like if you see someone who's in an accident, like someone gets hit by a car right in front of you. If you have no medical training at all, that's going to be a terrifying and horrible experience. And the first thing you're going to do is probably try and walk away and say, like, I can't bear to see this person. They're maimed, they're injured, they've got a broken leg. It's too awful. I can't bear seeing it. Well, if you're a trained medical professional and you feel like you have command of the situation, you see someone get hit by a car and you might even walk towards it. You'll go towards that car accident and say, don't worry, folks, I got this under control. We're going to save this person's life. And the same is true of the movement as a whole. If we see these animals suffering and we don't have hope and optimism and training for the future, then we're not going to be able to bear it. But I'm able to remain confident and optimistic because I've gotten support from many people like you. We have members and donors who are supporting us. We have lawyers stepping up. We have press coordinators. In the other room, I've got 2 of our press coordinators making sure if I get arrested, if I go to jail, they're going to tell a great story to the media. So when you get that sort of support, you have hope for the future, and that keeps you headstrong. So that's my answer, Aaron. I hope that answered your question. take one more question if there are any questions. Paula Lustenberg is saying empathic concern. Jason Peterson is saying, so people delude themselves. You're right, Jason. That's exactly what happens. People do delude themselves, and that's why they're often reluctant to go vegan and reluctant to join the animal rights movement, because they are deluding themselves. Noah D. Gurley is saying stop extinction. You're right. We do need to stop extinction. And I've said this before, and I don't like to say this too much, but while we do most of our work on animals in institutionalized animal exploitation, I always say I have bigger fish to save. That the end of factory farming, the end of the fur industry is just the first step. We have to save all the animals on this earth. And the number of animals that are being killed because of climate change and habitat loss and all the terrible things we're doing to animals in the wild probably outpaces the number of animals killed in factory farms by maybe 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. We might be talking about 1 trillion or 2 trillion animals who are suffering in the wild because of habitat loss and climate change and pollution. And that is the bigger picture game. And the reason the animal rights movement needs to focus on institutionalized animal exploitation first is because that is the easier problem. And if we achieve animal rights for the animals we directly exploit and harm, eventually that will flow through to affect our political decisions, our economic decisions, our civilization decisions with respect to animals in the wild. Okay, I think that is it. I don't have anything else to say. Again, I'm going to ask you all one last time to share this live stream, and please comment that you're sharing. It'll make me happy to see all of you commenting. I don't see too many people commenting they're sharing. You're going to make me break down in tears. I'm just kidding. I won't actually cry. I do cry, but usually it's because of animal suffering, not because someone didn't share my live stream. But I might cry today. You never know. So the only way to prevent me from crying today may be to share this live stream. And would you want that to happen? Do you want me crying the rest of the day? If not, then please share this live stream and comment that you're sharing. And I don't see anyone sharing. So you all are going to be very, very, very sad later today when you find out that I spent the rest of this afternoon crying. Ah, there we go. Paula Lustenberg shared. Thank you very much, Paula. I appreciate it. Anyone else going to share and make sure that Wayne doesn't cry this afternoon? I've been told that I'm emotionally quite robust, but the one thing that brings me down when I'm doing a Facebook live stream is seeing that no one is commenting and no one is sharing, because that's a terrible feeling. We're on Facebook Live and no one's watching and no one cares, but seeing that not only do people care, but they care enough to share. If you care, you share, right? If you share, you care, and if you care, you share. So I'm seeing Aaron Skinner is sharing, Elizabeth Marco is sharing, Darby Sharvat is sharing, Andy Christofi says he's sharing, Jazda Memesevich is sharing. Laura Belong is sharing. You all are awesome. So all of you are sharing, and then there's one guy in this live stream who's saying, don't share. We want to see those tears. And that's Carson. Carson, that's not very nice of you. And, if I had the power to ban you from the ALC, I might ban you from the ALC. Unfortunately, the ALC is not my project. If you don't know what the ALC is, it's the Animal Liberation Conference. It's coming up in May. It's actually May 29th and June 4th in UC Berkeley. Carson's been to the ALC every year the past couple of years. This year, I might try to have you banned for trying to make me cry. I'm just kidding. I don't think Carson actually means it. I don't think he's going to make me cry. Seeing who else is sharing. Aaron Skinner says he shared when he joined. Thank you very much. Oh, Carson did say he shared. Thank you very much. And he hosted a watch party. Who came to your watch party, Carson? So I spoke too soon. I'm sorry. I don't want to ban Carson from ALC because he did share this live stream and he doesn't want to see me cry. So I appreciate that. I see Nyla Rose is saying she's sharing. Dottie is sharing. Thank you very much, Dottie. I'll see you in a week at the Furban hearing. Let's see who else is sharing. Priya is shared in 4 groups, so Priya doesn't want me to cry. Thank you very much for preventing me from crying. Ruth Boyle is sharing. Shara Hewlett is sharing. Shola Lafakis, who's our social media superstar, is sharing. And she's commenting, everyone please share this live stream. All of you are awesome. Linda Cridge is saying she shared earlier on. Linda Cridge is an amazing activist from Indianapolis. I met her in Indianapolis a couple years ago when I did a speaking tour. I haven't been on a speaking tour for a while, because I'm dealing with all these criminal court cases, all these 15 felonies that Trent mentioned earlier. So it's hard for me to get out and about because I always have to be in court. It feels like every week I'm in another courtroom. But I don't think I have a whole lot else to say. Joan Oxley is sharing all the way from New Zealand. All right. If someone could share from New Zealand, there is no excuse. If you are not in New Zealand, you should be sharing, because it's like 1 a.m. or like 3 a.m. in New Zealand right now. And Joan is sharing all the way from New Zealand. And there's no excuse if it is normal daylight hours for you watching this live stream. You should be sharing. And Cassie King is sharing. Thank you very much, Cassie. All right. I think that's it then. I guess I have nothing else to say. Thank you all very much. Hope you enjoyed the live stream. And let me know if you have any feedback on this debate, because I want to do a better job of advocating for the animals next time. Hope I did a reasonable job today. One thing I didn't do a good job of today, and Priya's giving me crap about this. Notice I said crap and not the S word, so I'm correcting myself. So earlier in this live stream, I let a little curse word out, and I'm not supposed to do that. I've gotten in trouble for that. So please don't tell my bosses I guess you all are my bosses. So I just told my own bosses because the movement is my boss, and I just told my own boss that I violated my own rules. But I did let an S bomb out. Is that a thing people say? S bomb?
No.
I know F bomb is a thing.
F-bomb.
F bomb. S bomb. S bomb. I did let an S bomb out, so I made a little mistake. But the other mistake I made is my hair is like terrible right now. It's like growing in weird places and coming out in weird directions. And my hair is always kind of bad, but right now it's really bad. And I probably, before presenting myself for the animals, should have cut my hair so I looked a little better for the live stream. The lighting here is also kind of bad. You can see like the left side of my face is in shade because the lighting is a little weird. But there's nothing I can do about that. And I guess I'm just a dark person. But we'll just have to live in darkness together for the rest of our lives. Life is dark. It's not actually that dark. It's very bright and beautiful. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thank you all very much. I will see you next time. Bye.